That's it. I'm on the air. Cool. Okay. So, hello everybody. This is your opportunity to ask the Ask Project. A few weeks ago, 4 weeks ago probably, I sent a message or made a video asking people to send me their questions and ask me, as the person involved in the project, questions. I haven't looked at them yet. I was actually sick and lost my voice, so that's why it took so long for me to get to it. But now I will go for the first time to the page and read your questions and answer them. Hopefully this will be fun. So it seems to be, wait, hold on, let's do, I don't want to do a review, sorry. I guess I should have looked at this before. Top comment, that's perfect. Okay. First one, are the Muslims in Israel get equal and same rights compared to the Jewish people? Okay, so my understanding is that legally, every citizen of this country who has citizenship has the same rights, exactly the same rights as I do. Meaning, in theory, nobody can be discriminated against in housing or in jobs or pretty much in anything that they would want to do. There's no law that applies only for Jewish citizens of Israel that doesn't apply for Muslims and Christians and anyone else. Socially, though, there is some racism, I would say. I've encountered it. I would actually say there's also racism the flip side as well, but I'll mention that as well. Meaning, if you are Arab, Muslim, and you live in the north and then want to come to Tel Aviv, sometimes you might have an issue renting an apartment. People will find out that you have a Muslim name, meaning over the phone, either through your accent, or if you have like a very Israeli Jewish sounding accent, then once they see your ID or they ask you your name, and they find out you're Muslim, sometimes they will refuse to rent an apartment to you. I don't know if it happens often. I don't think so, because I know a lot of Arab Israelis who lived in Tel Aviv, and they obviously found apartments, but it happens, absolutely. I would say it probably happens in some jobs, in some areas, particularly anything to do with security, anything security related. So, for example, there used to be a major high-tech company, but I think it's gone now, but it originally started off making parts for the army. And because it was related to the security establishment, creating things for the army, you had to have been in the army, you had to prove you were in the army just to get a job there. And so an Arab Israeli, generally, not always, sometimes they do go to the army, often they don't. And so they would just be, if someone saw a Muslim name, with the CVs coming in, they would throw them out. I know this because I know the person who did that. So there definitely can be discrimination in some jobs. Though, on the flip side, I have to say that in terms of day-to-day, I see that people, Arab, Muslims, Christians, Druze, work in all sectors of society, in every area, region, like geographically and demographically of the country, and I don't notice any at all discrimination or even subtle discrimination there. I've never seen any. I've never heard any. Other than the stories I just told you, I can't really think of anything. So I would say yes, the Arab Israelis definitely have equal rights to the Jewish people. There's not one law that applies to me that doesn't apply to someone who's Muslim, and vice versa. And so yeah, that would be my answer. Number two. Two questions. Do you ever feel threatened or scared when you do these interviews? Okay, so I'll do the second one was completely different, so I just read it. No, well, it depends. On the Jewish side, not at all. Even though I've been, kind of sworn at, and people have become a little bit aggressive on the Jewish side, but I'm not afraid of them. I've never seen any Jewish on Jewish violence, let's put it that way. So and maybe I'm being naive, but I really don't think anyone will physically do anything to me, and that's all I care about. I don't care if they can swear at me, they can yell at me, they can call me a traitor, they can say whatever they want, I don't care. But in terms of violence, I've never felt really threatened, although you can tell people get very emotional and aggressive in the videos on the Jewish side. On the Palestinian side, it's very rare, but there have been a couple of times when I have been actually threatened and scared. The video I always talk about is, it was me going off. I was very, very tired. It was the beginning of the project. I had just spent the day in Ramallah hearing about how more Jews needed to be gassed in the Holocaust and how Hitler didn't do enough and didn't react and was tried to be professional about the whole thing. And then hearing some 16 or 17-year-olds go on and on about the Jews, and everything he said about Jews and Israelis was completely mythology. It was not based on any reality. And so I really just dug into him and actually even kind of pushed it even further, trying to, just to see his reaction. And at one point he said in Arabic, if you were a Jew, I would stab you, because he didn't think I was Jewish. And of course at the time, and I was told this by the guy translating, I was thinking in my mind, you idiot, shut up, don't say another word. But I have a problem and I just keep talking, and so you can see that in the video. Another time, not on video, in Hebron, I think I told the story before, but it's kind of funny. But 3 years ago in Hebron, we were asking about what people thought about ISIS, and ISIS in Arabic and Hebrew is Daesh. So we asked what people thought about Daesh. And one guy he was young, he was probably about 19 or 20, seemed, at least the translator kept saying, he's talking about Daesh as if it's a person, thinking it's a person's name. And so I was like, I didn't want him to feel stupid, and I didn't want him to look stupid, although he was. And I said, okay, try to explain to him this is an organization, not a person, and let's just see if maybe he's confusing it. That's okay, happens. And then anyways, he didn't really get it, it doesn't matter, and then we stopped filming, and it was a kind of a useless interview anyways, and we walked away, and he ran after us and said to her, my translator, in Arabic, I know where you live. If I see that online, I'm going to come and kill you. And she, I mean, I was afraid. She just looked at him and said, you little piece of shit. How dare you speak to a woman in her 30s that way? How dare you? And she was like a hero. Amazing. I was shitting my pants, of course. And I said, get the taxi, let's go. Let's go to the other side of Hebron, get away from this guy. Of course, I didn't use the interview because, well, he said nothing really that was meaningful, and I didn't want to get her into trouble. Other than that, no, but the rule is that when I'm there, I'm not Jewish, in theory, meaning we don't tell people I'm Jewish because, people are very paranoid in the Palestinian territories, and they are going to think I'm there as some kind of spy, which is ridiculous. I'm really there to get truth and understanding and what people actually think. But people might not interpret it that way, so there is that fear. At first, I got to say that at the very, very beginning, even before I did this project, when I go to the West Bank, I would specifically tell people I am Israeli on purpose, to see the look in their eyes. And the first few times I did it, I got a hug, I got to say, in Hebron. I got a hug and a kiss. Other times I got dirty looks, really dirty looks. Hard to know. It's, people don't necessarily say what they think, and even if they say something, you don't know if that's really what they feel, but more or less that's what I experienced. But basically every Palestinian I went with said, please don't do that to me again. It puts me in they said, not me as me, it puts them in a dangerous situation, because other Palestinians might think that they're working for an Israeli, therefore they are a traitor to their people. And while if I'm killed, I suppose the army might exact revenge. For them, that's never going to happen. So if somebody's killed because they're seen as a traitor, nobody is ever going to do anything about it. So I stopped doing that, because I thought, as much as I want to know the truth, it's unfair to do that to other people. Okay, next part of the question, though, because they asked two questions. By moving to Israel, did you do the required military service? No, I did not. I actually regret it a little bit. I was 25 when I actually became a citizen. I was drafted, meaning I had to go for meetings. I wanted to get out of it. They basically looked at me and said, we have too many people. I don't know if you want out of it. You don't have to do this. So in the end, I didn't. I really didn't want to, because at 25, you are, that was a lot then. Sure, it's changed since then. I would be doing basic service, like learning, running with the gun and learning how to use a gun and all that sort of thing. And then probably doing something kind of useless for 4 months, like folding laundry. At least I think that's what I would be doing. And I would be doing it with other immigrants, because they tend to just put the immigrants together. And I just thought that's a waste of my time. And I was a little bit afraid of, not so much of, like, I didn't think I'd be put in a situation of going to the West Bank, but I don't know, I just didn't like the whole idea. Yeah, I didn't really agree. I agree with, obviously I agree that we have to have the army, it's very important, but I don't really agree with a lot of the policies of the army and what they do, and what if I was forced into that, even though in 4 months, I doubt that would ever happen to me. That's for combat soldiers, who are only 15% of soldiers. But okay, taking that aside. So I didn't do it. And the only regret I have is that, because now I went on to study conflict and why it is that people fight and how they get themselves into these situations, it would be very interesting if I had some experiences in the army that would I'd be able to use to help understand the psychology of a conflict. So that's my only regret in that sense. I have nothing formal to base my views on, meaning I wasn't in the army, I wasn't in the situation, I didn't stand at a checkpoint, I never raided a Palestinian home. I don't think I'd want to, but from the point of view of understanding what it takes to do that, or what you experience, and do you feel bad, do you not, how do you see it? I don't have that kind of experience, so that part I kind of regret. Next question. Hold on. Aren't you tired of hearing BS, bullshit? How do you manage to control your temper? Of course, well, what I interpret as bullshit is not bullshit to the person who's saying it. Of course, they believe what they're saying. I try in situations where it's actual facts. For example, the Temple Mount is a good example. I'll show you where like the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque area, when Muslims will say, no, that's not holy to Jews. So I try to put in, I mean, it's a fact, it's holy to Jews. It just is. Sorry, Muslims. I know you like to believe it isn't, but it is. Muslims will claim it's actually not supposed to be there. The Holy Temple is supposed to be somewhere else, or the Jews made it up, or there's all kinds of bizarre theories. Doesn't matter. The truth is that for thousands of years, Jews have believed it's in that spot and pray to it, and that's where they pray towards when they pray. So the version of Mecca for Jews, or the Kaaba for Jews, and it's holy. So when Muslims talk about how they won't allow Jews into the area, just as an example, I'll listen and I won't really say anything, although I'll always question, based on my Canadian values, is why can't we share? I don't get that. But when they will say something like, no, it's not holy to the Jews, then of course I will fact. So, because it is fact. And the same thing on the about Palestinians, when Israelis say things, although Israelis tend to say less, they say a lot of bullshit, but they tend to say a lot of less infactual things that are, they tend to know the truth a bit better. But when it comes to opinions, when it comes to narratives, when it comes to how things are seen, truth is it's a hard thing. People are going to see which is the truth that this land is Jewish or Palestinian, for example. That you can't, there's no truth to any of this. I know everyone's going to choose a side in this, whatever. But that's perception. That's about perception. And you could give facts saying it was controlled by Jews at this time, and it was controlled by Palestinians actually never at all, but Palestinians have lived here for thousands of years, and yes, and you go through that whole history. But in terms of saying who does it belong to, I'm not going to weigh in on that. I mean, I have my own views, but that doesn't matter. So am I tired of hearing? Yeah, but I think it's interesting. I mean, there is no one truth, first of all. And regardless, even if there is, even if I'm sure XYZ is the truth, is a whole other side of people who I have to deal with, Palestinians, who see the truth in a completely different way. So different that as if we're talking about two different places. And my job as a person, not just as a person doing this project, and not even as a person who is a junkie for conflict resolution and conflict theory, but as a person who lives here, I have to understand that they see it differently. Now, I could spend all the time I want trying to convince them that they're wrong, but did that ever work? I'm an atheist. How could I can't prove to someone there is no God. To me, it just seems the most natural thing in the world. To somebody who believes in God, belief in God is the most natural thing in the world. I need to understand that. In order to coexist. So how do I deal with that and control my temper? You get used to it. Sometimes, a lot of people think I'm not controlling my temper when I challenge them. Sometimes it is my temper, I gotta say. If it's something new, it's me, or partially me. A lot of the times I'm actually giving, I have someone in my head who, what would they think? Like somebody who's sort of the opposite of what they're saying. So if they're saying the Palestinians never had independence, or they were never a country, they were never a kingdom, they were never, so I have someone who's Palestinian in my head saying in the back of my head, yes, but blah, 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 blah. So I'll give that argument, and it might look like I'm being really emotional about it. It's more of I'm kind of channeling them, because I know this is what they would be thinking, sitting in front of their computer, watching this, going, hey, but why don't you say that? Now, I can't do it for every question, for everything. I do it every so often just to try to get more information. It's not to prove a point. It is not to say who's right and who's wrong. It really is to challenge the person in front of me to how to adapt to new information. So if I say what you're saying is bullshit because blah, 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 I want to see what they're going to react, if they can react. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. So that's what's interesting to me. And then other times I'm tired. They're long days. I'm old. I'm tired. And yeah, I react emotionally. It's my project. I get to do it. Next, going down. Do you think Hamas could be less extreme if it wasn't Islamic? Do you ever fear for your safety when you're doing these ask questions? Okay, second part, I already answered. Do you think Hamas would be less extremist if it wasn't Islamic? I don't know. I would say yes, compare in a sense. If I compare, I know a lot of religious people and a lot of people are very much Jewish, Christian, Muslim. I would say at the moment, Islam has a lot more violence going along with it at the moment. Traditionally, Jews did biblically. Wow, oh yeah, read the Bible. And Christians did for 1,500 years. So, for them to be pointing fingers is a bit full of shit, but okay. Yes, but currently, yeah, in the Islamic world, there's a lot of violence. Would they be less extreme if they were Christian? Who knows? You never know. First, part of it is just human nature, and people don't like being pushed around. They don't like not getting what they want. They have certain identity needs or practical needs that need to be dealt with in conflict. But is there a difference between how somebody Muslim and how somebody Christian deals with it? Sometimes, yeah, I'm sure there are. I am not an expert enough to really explain what it is and why it is, because if you read the Quran, and I've read the Quran, and you read the Bible, I've read the Bible, there's as much violence, at least, someone could do a study and probably maybe find more in one or the other. I think somebody actually did and found that the Bible actually has more, but don't know if that's true or not, no clue. Doesn't matter. The point is, it's a book, and people gain inspiration from a book and use what they want from that book. So it says, for example, that you should not you shouldn't have sex with a man the way you would with a woman in Old Testament, and for that you can be stoned. I think it's an abomination. You can be killed. I can't remember if the punishment is stoning or not. It doesn't really matter. nobody's stoning anymore. Whereas in when people, some will, and then there are radicals in Islam who will take it literally, what it says in the Quran. I don't know. Hamas exists as an Islamic group, as an extremist group, as a group struggling against occupation slash how they see as colonization, because they see it as the Jews colonized Palestine, stole Palestine from their perspective. And so would they be less extreme? I have no idea. I don't know if this is a question. Yes, this is to me. It says, what do you know about Palestine? That's a huge question. Sounds like a question I would ask, actually. Okay, put it on the spot. What do I know about Palestine? Palestine is a region of the Middle East. It was given the name from by the Romans, who were punishing the Jews because they were in an uprising, over the irony. And so use the word Palestine, which actually comes from, at least my understanding, from biblical scholars, from the Philistines, from the name of the Philistines, which came from the Bible. And I don't know if the Philistines actually called themselves the Philistines, but in the Bible, the word pleshet means an invader. So that's the ancient history. And then it became Palestine. The region became known as Syria / Palestine, depending on who was in control, leading up to the time of building of nation states, when Zionism started in the 1880s, 1890s. Jews started to come to what was Palestine, and wanting it to be a Jewish state. The way they viewed it was, yes, of course, there were people here. It's not an empty land. I mean, it's sort of phrased that way, but really everyone knew it's not really empty. But the people were, Arab Muslim, and didn't have a sense of national identity other than being Arab Muslim, perhaps a little bit of Ottoman identity thrown in there with some Arab, going back and forth. But the idea of actually being a Palestinian actually didn't really start until the 1920s as a reaction to Zionism, which I assume means, hey, they have a good sense of national identity. What about us? How are we? And then they felt kind of left out because all the different Arab groups were doing their own thing in terms of national identity. So intellectuals started to frame themselves as Palestinian, but that didn't really spread to the average person until the 50s and 60s as a reaction to the creation of the State of Israel and to being homeless. I don't know if that answers your question. What do you know about Palestine? Oh, and in terms of modern day, what you would consider Palestine, I refer to the West Bank and Gaza as Palestine. I don't consider Israel Palestine. I understand completely how Palestinians can see it as their historical Palestine. Absolutely, I understand. In the same way that I understand that Nablus and Hebron are ancient Israel. You can have them, but from my perspective. But yes, that's where my history started. My genetic line started there. It's interesting, but doesn't mean I want it. And about today's Palestine, you can Google easily all the indicators from well, it's on an OECD country, but all the indicators around the world, whether in the CIA fact book or GDP or any of those type of indicators, to know what West Bank, Gaza / Palestine is and what it means and who they are in that sense. And that's how I look at it, at least intellectually. And then in terms of who they are as people, they're my neighbors. Okay, so here's a different way of looking at it. As a person who lived in Israel, I knew some Arab people before I started all this, meaning Arab Israelis who are Palestinian, but didn't know very much about Palestinian culture at all. In Israeli culture, first of all, there's two things. First of all, half the country is actually of Arab, I'll put it in quotes, heritage, meaning Jews who came from Arab countries. And that could be a really wide range of cultures, from Morocco to Egypt to Yemen to Syrian to Iraqi. Those are the big groups. And they have their own, of course, we call it Mizrahi culture, but it's Arab culture. And so you learn about Arabness through them in a sense, even because you don't have much contact with people who are Palestinian / Arab Israeli. Even though you actually interact day to day, nobody really talks about the interesting stuff, how they see the world, because that's too threatening for each side, right? So, so you, at least for me, as a person who came to have to understand Israeli culture, it's all new to me as an immigrant. You understand Arab culture through Mizrahi culture, and then you meet Arab Israelis, and then maybe if you're lucky, you meet Palestinians, and you learn a lot of subtleties about Palestinian culture and how the differences between Palestinian culture and other related cultures, and you learn to figure out where they fit in and what their cultures are. I'm still definitely, that's part of the reason I actually do the project, is to learn about Palestinian culture. So for example, it took me a really long time to know all of their negative stereotypes about Jews, because some of them you hear about, and others that the average Israeli has no clue exists. For example, one of the, I think I just posted it, Jews can't keep an agreement. Something I don't think Jews have any clue that are said about them in the Arab and Muslim world. Although I don't know if it's particularly Palestinian. I think it's Arab and Muslim, but I asked Palestinians that, or that Israelis have no culture. That was another one that I went, what? What are you talking about? I have no idea what we're talking about. So part of my role here is to look into that, because that has an impact. It doesn't matter if it's a social impact, meaning two people, a Palestinian and a Jew, an Israeli Jew, are working together, it happens, or an Arab Israeli and Jew are working together. They never talk about these things. These things never come up. The perceptions of the other, and whether that's the day-to-day or negotiations. When those people go into the room and they sit together, Palestinians and Israeli negotiators, do they have any clue what the other thinks of the other? One thinks of the other. No, they generally don't. They really have no clue. And that's interesting and sad. And there's a lot of misperceptions and a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of self-fulfilling prophecy, huge amount, meaning I go into it and I think Jews aren't going to keep their agreements. In my mind, I have it set out a list of what that means, an agreement. And in the Jewish person's mind, they don't have the same list. So when they do something that's, that is on the Palestinian shit list that they shouldn't be doing, according to the Palestinians, of course, I'm sure the Israelis know they probably shouldn't be doing that. For example, building in settlements. That is, of course, was understood as, yeah, probably shouldn't be doing this, but let's do it anyways. But at the same time, it's not seen by Jewish Israelis as breaking an agreement. There's nothing in the agreement that specifically says you cannot build in settlements. So just as I'm using that as an example, don't criticize me on what I said. I'm just saying as an example of two sides who come into the room with perceptions of what they expect from each other, and of course their expectations are not met, or the opposite, the negative expectations are met because that's the way they saw it from the beginning and they're looking for it. So yeah, so that's a really long answer to what do you know about Palestine. So I'll go on to the next one. What do you think that the conflict will be over in the next 10 to 15 years? No, not at all, never, actually. Even if there is a negotiated agreement, which I really do hope there is. I actually think that any negotiated agreement is better than no negotiated agreement, because it gives a solidity. It's like being the difference between Palestinians being a state and not being a state. It gives you some roots. It gives something for people to hold on to. The problem is with any agreement, it doesn't matter what the agreement is. You could say we're turning this all into Disneyland and thinking everyone's going to be happy. Someone's going to have an issue, and someone is going to go against it, and someone is going to actively either use violence or what's perceived as violence by the other side, to destroy it. So even if tomorrow somebody came down, some very strong leader, bashed the two leaders' heads together and said, we're forcing you into this agreement, whether you like it or not. Hopefully they would like it, because the more you like the agreement, the better chance there is of it actually surviving. Let's pretend, okay? And let's say it's the most perfect agreement we could ever get to. Conflict is not that simple. It's not just about a negotiated settlement. It's also about perceptions and individuals and ideas. And very quickly, the conflict, all that energy, all that emotion can be changed into something else. And when I say that, people who teach conflict, mostly people who teach conflict outside of this region because they live in an easier society, like to think of that in terms of positive sense, meaning let's turn the negatives into positives. It's very, very, very difficult to do that in situations of emotional, long-term conflict, because people have great, deep anger, hate, resentment, and anything that comes up after can remind them of that. I mean, you look at something as simple like the war in Yugoslavia that happened. One of the triggers was the remembering of a battle from 600 years ago that was memorialized and sort of brought up. And I know it's way more complex than that, I know. But I'm just saying, people can latch on to ancient angers and ancient very old ideas that are still kicked around in each other's cultures, to use that to create new conflicts very easily. And it doesn't even take a leader or a manipulative leader. It can be something, as what's benign to one person isn't to the other. So I'll give an example. In Akko, every couple of years you hear about this. Akko is a city in the north of Israel, and it is mixed between Jews and Israeli Arabs, Muslims mostly. And there is a day in Judaism called Yom Kippur, it's Day of Atonement, and on that day nobody drives. Literally nobody drives. Nobody takes their car out. Nobody does any work. There's nothing open but driving. I'll use as the example. And if someone in an Arab neighborhood, technically they can drive, there's no law against it, drives into a Jewish neighborhood, to the Jews it's seen as disrespect for the Jewish religion, and they will pick up rocks and throw it at the car. It's happened. Just as it happens with Palestinians or Muslims who perceive something, for example, when people go into a mosque and they don't take off their shoes or their boots. It's happened with soldiers who have gone in and they're not allowed. It's an actual army law. They're not allowed to take off their boots when they have to go in there to speak to somebody, because of the whole issue of it'll take some time to do up the boots, and then they're in a precarious situation where they can be attacked. So they're saying, okay, with all due respect to your your beliefs and your religious beliefs, I'm not putting our soldiers at risk. So this happens all the time, where Muslims will see or take a picture of a soldier with boots and saying, aha, they came in here specifically to desecrate the place. From the Jewish perspective, that never happened. They didn't come in to desecrate the place. They know they're supposed to take off their shoes, but when you don't, it happens to all of us. When we don't have that particular taboo or idea in our culture, it's not as meaningful. I know it should be. In a perfect world, it would be. I get it. It just isn't. So, if I saw an Arab, a Muslim, driving on Yom Kippur, I'm not going to pick up a rock and throw it at him. I wouldn't pick up a rock and throw it at anybody. But I'm not going to do that because I'm thinking, well, maybe he's on his way to the hospital. Maybe, maybe something's wrong. Maybe my instinct wouldn't be, aha, he's doing this on purpose. But I'm Canadian. This is the Middle East. And in the Middle East, you always assume that the person doing something is doing something against you specifically, and they knew it from the beginning, even though that's never the truth, ever. Almost ever. Very few people have that, a mind that is actually complex enough to even think through that. Almost all of these things that happen that you read about and hear about are misunderstandings or they're sort of understood, yes, I shouldn't be doing this, but I have to be doing this because of other reasons. So just taking that into account, and those things happen every single day. I personally do them all the time. For example, in Israeli culture, it is considered very, very rude to not compliment people on things. So if you're eating something and you just say, "Oh, it's good," that's almost an insult in this culture. As if anyone Arab is watching knows this as well. Exactly. You have to go on and on about that food as if you have to exaggerate what you're doing. I'm a Canadian. I forget that every time, and I always forget it. And even at the beginning, I would say, "Oh, it's good, yeah," and I'd be like very humble and sweet and nice, because to us as Canadians, that's enough. To a lot of people would get really offended, and they're always offended by me. Not being, there's even a word in Hebrew and probably in Arabic for it, not giving enough attention to something. And I still, after 20 years, I still do that. So imagine that happening on all these individuals, all this friction going on. Even if there was an agreement in place, all that anger underneath boils up so quickly and is attached to all these minor things that I'm talking about. You would think, what's the big deal? Okay, so somebody drives, big deal. In every other country, people drive, even on holy days. Those things boil up and are perceived by each group differently, and that can set off a war. That can seriously set off an entire war over something as ridiculous as that, as, no offense, but wearing shoes on a carpet or driving on a holy day. So yes, I know people outside love to believe that all it takes is someone to force the two groups together, and that will be part of it. That's a big part, actually. But that's not going to solve it all, and it's definitely not in the next 10 to 15 years. You need generations. And the second part, actually, to this is not just generations of forgetting that pain and anger. You also need both groups to be on the same level in terms of power, more or less, in terms of how they feel about power, economically and culturally. And the two groups are so different culturally. They each have their own triggers and their own histories and their own shtick, that goes on, and they're not on the same page at all. In fact, the other's history, not only will they not learn it, it's threatening to them. So they won't even learn about it, to know that it's, you're doing that because of this in your past. Interesting. Okay, I'll see what I can do and not do that. That's not going to happen. That's not how people in conflicts tend to think. They're not at least they don't feel they can be as developed as that. So yeah, it's going to be really, really, this will be going on for a long, long time. Hopefully, truthfully, it's not that bad. I got to say, I know the Israeli-Palestinian conflict gets so much attention, but other than I don't want anybody getting killed, of course, but other than the wars have been going on with Lebanon or Gaza in the last 15, 20 years, most of it is very, very low simmer, and mostly people, 99% of the time, people, I don't know if they interact, but they go on with their lives, and people's lives are actually not that bad. Gaza is a bit different because they're having a really harder time, and that's a whole different issue. But I'm saying, and I don't know because I haven't been to Gaza, so I don't want to, say too much because I don't actually know. But the West Bank, I do know. I drive around the West Bank. It's not a bad place to live, really. I saw much more poverty in Jordan than in the West Bank, and there is poverty in the West Bank, and there is poverty in Israel. But and overall, Israelis are richer than Palestinians, for sure. But it's not a bad place to live, the West Bank, actually, in terms of if you don't get into the psychology of the conflict. I'll leave that aside. Next question. How am I doing on time? Given that you have heard many people from both sides of the conflict, what do you feel is the biggest obstacle for peace on each side? Can the obstacles be dealt with? Biggest? I don't know. I still come back to the culture, actually. I think that's the biggest obstacle. I think the two cultures are very, very different. They think in very different ways. Maybe I'm focusing on it because not many people focus on it, because at least internationally, it's kind of not politically correct to talk about people's cultures. I think actually that's the most interesting part about the conflict. I mean, really, realistically, I know it really is, these are political decisions, right? So leaders, one person with a certain core group behind them in their parliament, or however it's going to be dealt with, really decide on whether to go to war or not go to war, or how much to fight and how severely to fight. And so I know actually the real statistic, the important things are actually dealt with at the political level. I just find that less interesting. So in one sense, the biggest obstacle in that sense is having two leaders who are both like-minded at the same time, in power, who have enough belief from their own peoples. There's been very few of those historically with either group, and they're not lining up at all. On the Palestinian side, my personal, this is me, I thought Salam Fayyad was amazing. He was the only person, the only Palestinian leader I've ever heard speak who I thought, yes, this is a leader. And not a leader, I mean, a leader isn't a smart leader, because that's what I'm looking for. I don't care about a strong leader. I don't care about a believable leader in the sense that, whether the street believes in him. I care about someone who's state-built, who looks to the future and says, these are going to be the issues in the next 10, 20, 50 years. He seemed to be that person from what I read about him and saw. And unfortunately, he was actually thrown out because of that. He wasn't in line with the leadership or the street of how Palestinians think, which is very sad. On the Israeli side, we're just talking about this actually, about those leaders. We were at the Yitzhak Rabin Center, and like one of the things about him, although he was on the left and a lot of people criticized him, but he was considered a folk hero in a sense because of his history. So he could kind of drag a lot of people with him into Oslo, and that's probably the only reason it even moved forward. And then there's people like Ariel Sharon, who's not someone I would ever support, but he was considered a leader. He was, both by Palestinians and by Israelis, was considered, he was hated by Palestinians, but at the same time respected by Palestinians, in the sense that he was tough, he was believable. And he, for Israelis, he was that godfather uncle who, if you told him that someone's messing with you, he'd go and break their knees. So by a lot of Israeli standards, he was considered a good leader too. I don't see anyone on the horizon who's a great leader who captures the imaginations of the people and seems to tell the people what they should hear, not what they want to hear. That there are a lot of issues. There's a lot of things ahead of us, a lot of things going on now that we ignore, that we shouldn't be ignoring. And I don't mean that in the right-left sense. I don't mean that in the, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about there's just a huge amount of issues that, on any practical level, we really should be looking at, and we don't. But I still think the biggest obstacle to peace will always be culture. We have Israelis who are much more westernized, but have a long, deep history, which is remembered and commemorated. I mean, part of being Jewish is commemorating the tragedies that happened to the Jewish people for the last 3,000 years. That's a huge part of Judaism as a religion, the Jewish people as a culture, and Palestinians who are much more Eastern, but sort of trying to figure out how they fit into the modern world. So there's a lot of talk about the role of women, even gay people in Palestinian society. That's more in the young and intellectual crowd, but still, it's there. People are talking about it. How do you fit in? How do Palestinians fit in, or Arab Muslims fit into modern day societies while still keeping their Arab Muslim identity, Palestinian identity? Part of the issue, as the way I see it, I think I've said this before, is I see Palestinian culture as being half-baked in a sense, meaning in the sense that it doesn't have, Israeli society and Israeli culture has a country behind it. It has an internationally recognized country for the last 68 years as roots for it, right? So you feel a certain amount of freedom and power to explore who you are, and it's not quite so threatening. Palestinians have never had any independence or that sense of a solid sense of identity in a recognized way. I don't mean, obviously, there's Palestinian identity. I don't mean that, meaning that it doesn't exist. Of course it exists, but it's newer, just like Israeli identity, it's new. But it hasn't had the roots that that Israeli identity has had, that benefit. So it's still, there's certain issues that, go more to the conservative side when it comes to dealing, like, let's say, women. It very quickly goes to the conservative side because, when you're not secure in who you are, it's easier to be conservative. It's easier to go back to a certain way of being. So just those sort of ways of dealing with each other, and because that frames how we think, right? So when we interact with each other, we're thinking about different things. We're just at different levels. And so when Israelis and Palestinians meet, it's kind of not much to talk about. And it's kind of sad. It's a lot about, your hummus is good, my hummus is good. Yes, we need to have peace. It doesn't kind of go beyond that. It doesn't go, at least this is my sense, it's just observations. And then people will say, no, what are you talking about? I have this good friend. Yeah, okay. I'm just saying, my observation is it's not as easy when you're dealing with two very different cultures, because you're just at different levels, in different headspaces, in different worldviews, and other might even be threatening to you in some way. They might be insulting to you in some way. So it makes it difficult, and that's how conflict starts, is all those misunderstandings and taking things out of context and or insulting each other, but not really meaning to insult each other, like I'm sure I did in this talk 500 times, because that's who I am. But that's how conflict gets started. So I think that is one of the biggest obstacles for peace. I think having an agreement at least solidifies people into not wanting to change status quo, because we all like what exists as opposed to an unknown future. That's just human nature. Okay, I'll answer two more because I'm getting tired. Okay. Do you think the UN and Arab countries are purposely trying to not solve the refugee problem, but because they can use it as a weapon against Israel by not integrating Palestinians? So I guess the question comes down to this: do you think UNRWA is an obstacle for peace? That's a political question. I'm not a very political person. Yeah, it seems to be correct. I mean, the underlying idea in the Arab and Muslim world is Israel's a colony. Should not exist. It is Jews who came from Europe. That's not true. Some did, but I'm saying not only true. And Jews, according to them, are from Europe, which is absolutely not true. It's genetically proven. We're actually from here. So we are. It can't be a colony because we're a colony from where? We're a colony from here. So you could have called people in Poland or in Yemen a colony, because technically they were from here, and that's been proven actually genetically, scientifically. But let's take that aside. The Arab and Muslim world need to believe that Israel is a colony living on Arab Muslim land. Most are willing, and actually most are willing to make peace with Israel because they know they can't beat them militarily. So better to go this path for now. But that doesn't mean I don't know how to do with the refugees exactly, but the refugees are a different issue to them. That is also a concept of justice, meaning refugees, because Arabs and Muslims were displaced from this place, they need to go back to the exact same place they were from. That is at least the defaults. I mean, there's other people saying, okay, we'll give compensation, or they can go to the new Palestinian country in the West Bank or Gaza. There's different workarounds for this, but basically the real justice for them is going back to their original villages, which can't happen because we're talking about millions and millions of people. It's never going to happen. Israel will never agree to that because there are 6 million Israeli Jews and another 5 million Palestinians coming into being plunked on them, besides the logistical issues of there's now a university on that village, or a Jewish town on this village, or there are a few that aren't, but there's abandoned villages which still technically could become new villages. But for the majority, that's not true, or I think the majority. And even then, even if logistical parts, there's the logistical part of how do you integrate these 5 million, and even if it isn't 5 million, let's say only a fifth of them count, 1 million people who, it was hard enough when 1 million Russians came, they believed in the concept of Israel being a Jewish state, of Zionism. These are people who, that is evil to them. How do you integrate them into Israeli society? It is a recipe, and it is, to me, a recipe for a different type of conflict, a civil war of people trying to gain control of power. I understand why they would want to come back. I understand that fully. Jews wanted to come back. It's in our prayers. I'm not religious, but in Jewish prayers, every day of the idea of return. It's always existed. It's not something new. It's not Zionism. That's just the political nationalistic movement to do it. But the idea of return, Jews have been returning here forever, always. My great-great-grandfather did it. And that's quite common. And the belief in return was always there, even with the non-Zionists and even the anti-Zionists. So if you go question the anti-Zionists who are saying, yes, it's Palestinians, you say, but who does the land belong to? They'll say it belongs to the Jews. So they're a little full of shit too. Anyways, so is UNRWA an obstacle to peace? Yeah, I think we should be dealing with, not through UNRWA, not through the UN, I think we should be dealing each other to come to an agreement together and realize that on both sides, the world has changed. It is now a much more global world, which means, yeah, there's a certain amount of openness here to integrating some refugees. I'm okay with that to a certain extent, as long as it doesn't put my life at risk, as long as it doesn't change the culture dramatically. I'm open to the Palestinian culture. I think there's a lot of positive things in the Palestinian culture. But if we're talking about, reality and what works and common sense, we have to have a discussion about how we're going to settle those refugees, whether in Arab countries or in a Palestinian state that would exist in the West Bank, which seems legitimate to me, although probably dangerous to Israel. I absolutely, I see the right-wing view on this. I get it. Still, the humanist in me still says I get why they want to come back. Now, I should also point out that I am also a refugee according to their standards. My grandparents, one on each side, was thrown out of the country that they were living in for hundreds of years. Well, we don't know how many years actually, because Jews were forced. Every Jew actually is a refugee in that sense, because every country in Europe and some of the Middle East have kicked out their Jews at one time or another. Plus, where do Jews come from? The word Jew means Judea, which is actually the region from Jerusalem to Hebron. So genetically, we're related to a group who was thrown out of their land. That's the idea. Now, we should also be then compassionate towards the Palestinians who had the same thing happen to them. And yes, I think most Jews, most Israelis are very compassionate until it either crosses a threatening line or really does start to become an issue of my security versus your sense of identity. Then we have an issue. So that's something we could discuss. That's something we have to discuss. I don't think UNRWA should be involved. I really think it's just a way of using a third party to have the conflict keep going on. I think we need to be dealing with each other directly. Okay, last one is a question for other people, not for me. Okay, last one. This is a good one. Do you think that one day Palestinians and Israelis will live in a federal country like Canada or the US? Great question and a great idea. No, it will never happen. We're dealing with the Middle East. It is tribal. We are a tribal people. This is from a person named Abdullah bin Musa. You know as well as I know, we are a tribal people. Now, we want to break from that, of course. The world we live in is moving towards a globalized, internationalized idea of citizenship and rights and identity. Absolutely legitimate. We are still not there, first of all. I mean, look at Brexit and Trump. In a lot of ways, we're still not there. People are still quite conservative about, no, this is mine and that's yours. it's a human nature thing, I think. So I think there is something to look at in terms of a federated country, in the sense of Israelis and Palestinians share land. We really both see the entire land as belonging to each group. We really do. Jews see it as belonging to them, willing to give up the West Bank, some of them not, whatever. Palestinians almost entirely see the entire land as Palestine because it's sort of new and they see it as a colonial invasion. It's not. But okay, so get rid of all these sort of narratives. We live together. We really do. Our roads are integrated. Our electrical supply is integrated. Our water is integrated. Even our sewage is integrated, whether we like it or not. It actually is. I mean, Israel set up most of they were based on more ancient roads and ancient supply lines. But yeah, you drive straight from Herzliya and you get through the West Bank and you cut over until you hit Jordan, pretty much. Same highway. We having a federal system where there's some kind of supra level dealing made up of at the moment it's all Israel controlling, but made up of Palestinians and Israelis, to me makes a lot of sense. If they could agree on anything. In terms of one binational country of you know, where everyone where both groups are equally controlling, that's never going to work. It's going to turn into a civil war. We're going to kill each other worse than it is today. I swear to you. No group is willing to give up power. No group is willing to share power. Israelis are Jews. We've been living for 2,000 years. Somebody else controlling us has always ended badly. Always. I don't care. You can tell me in Morocco, it was wonderful. It was wonderful at certain very specific times. I can give you a bunch of dates where it wasn't so wonderful for the hundreds and thousands of people who were killed. Other, you know, people talk about what other areas of the world were, you know, the Jewish area, Iraq, let's say, under the golden age of Islam. Yes, it was terrific for Jews. There were a lot of Jewish, or Spain, Andalusia, a great example. It ended. These come in waves. I think they're terrific. I wish we could hold on to this. Human nature takes over, and we become very tribal, and we have tribal religions. Unless you're willing to give up your religion completely, and your identity completely to form a completely different identity, which I don't know anyone who is, I don't see it ever working. A binational state, it will turn into, it's basically setting up Yugoslavia, or you know, or Lebanon, Beirut, or something like that. You're forcing these people who don't really want to be together and think differently to have to deal with each other, and not in a positive way. So that's binational. And then the idea is you have two states, and each controls, they each have their own parliament, Palestine and Israel, and then they have a federation. People have been talking about this. I forget their names. I'm Facebook friends with them. There's a couple of different ideas rolling around. They're just people. They're not leaders in any way. I mean, leaders in terms of the government in any way. So these are not like formal ideas that go forward. But there are people who've thought up this stuff. They have great ideas. I think they're terrific. It just has to be, if it did, it has to be in a very practical way. So when you're dealing with things like infrastructure, water, sewage, roads, electricity, absolutely. I see it's in both our interests to work together. Absolutely. In terms of regional, of control of, we're actually control of villages and towns and stuff, that's actually kind of easy to do. The issue is going to be who polices and who is in the army. I don't see us being able to be in the same army or police force at all. There's way too much fear and hate. I wish it wasn't the case, but it is. And so for now, I would say, no, that I don't see it. I don't think anyone's going to agree with it. Besides the fact of whether I agree with it or you agree with it, doesn't matter. It's whether or not it will work. Yeah, I think that takes care of that one. I think that's it. I think I'm gonna leave it at that. And yeah, that's it. So I think that's. No, I haven't talked about that. Okay, so I thought it suddenly was off for some reason. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody who watched. I hope that answered some of your questions. I actually hate doing these. I mean, I kind of like doing these because it clears up some of the misunderstandings that this project creates, but I actually like the project to be what's important, not me. So yes, I'll do this again at one point, but for now, I hope that answers your questions. Take care.